Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to St Mary's Perivale. For a special afternoon today, we have Vanessa Latache giving us a lecture entitled Guiding Young Talents, and hopefully saying something about her extraordinary life and career. I've known Vanessa for about 30 years because she was brought up in Ealing, and we have a lot of mutual friends and acquaintances, and she's a hugely respected figure in the piano world now. I must have had about 40 or 50 of her RCM pupils come and give recitals here, and they all speak so highly of her, both as a teacher and as a person, which is equally important. So I'm really looking forward to what she's got to say. So without more ado, I'll get off the stage, and a big warm welcome to Vanessa.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Hugh, very much for inviting me here today to this wonderful church in Perivale, St Mary's, my old stamping ground, really. So it's fantastic to be back here and to be able to broadcast to you all live and talk to you. Thank you, Hugh, for inviting me to talk about my journey as a professional towards being head of keyboard at the Royal College of Music, and also, of course, along the way to hopefully discuss what it is actually to guide young talents on their own journeys as well. So, as Hugh asked me at the beginning, he said to me, well, what do you actually do as head of keyboard? What do you do? And that's a question that one gets asked a lot, actually, outside of the profession, of course. And how does one become a head of the keyboard? How does one become a teacher at a conservatoire, for that matter? It's a bit like the questions that performers get asked, you know, what do you do for your day job? Well, that's the old cliche. Of course, they still get asked that. And what do you do all day is another favourite question for people who spend hours and hours practising. And people often don't realise that. It's a very, very long journey, of course, to go towards being a professor at a conservatoire. And so I'll start off, if I may, and outline my route of my journey there. As I said, I'm very much on home ground here. I was actually born in Isleworth in Middlesex, which isn't far away from here. And my parents, in more recent years, my mother taught at the Royal College of Music Junior Department, and my father was a very knowledgeable man about music. He wasn't a musician at all. He was your sort of phone a friend. If ever you needed to know anything about music, he was the one we went to. Very knowledgeable about music, jazz particularly. And I have a younger brother, Simon, who is now a jazz pianist and also former music teacher now in Cornwall. And we were brought up with music in the house a lot, of course. My maternal grandfather, my mother's father, he was a wonderful man. He was a piano maker. And he worked for Bosendorffers originally, and before that, Mornington and Westons, the British firm of piano makers that we don't hear of anymore, sadly. So there was always a piano in the house on my mother's side, and she played, of course, and taught later, as I said. On my father's side, there wasn't really any music to speak of, but there's a very prophetic moment in his life that happened when he was brought up in the East End of London and came across to the West Side, where we are now, to visit some family. And on the night that they went back to their home at the East End of London, in the war it was, the house was bombed and flattened, completely flattened. But there was one thing left standing, and that was a Barnes upright piano, for which none of the people in that household played. But that's incredible, really, rather prophetic, I think, that he was later, of course, to marry my mother and to have children who were musicians. So, as I said, the piano particularly has always been at the heart of our family music making. We played piano duets, my mother and I, and my brother and I as well. And the clarinetist, Michael Collins, spent his youth with my family, living and playing music every day with all of us. And that was also exciting to have someone else in the family who played another instrument that we could play together. Of course, we all played various instruments too at the time. Before learning the piano as a youngster, I was very interested and loved ballet. Still love ballet, actually. It's a fantastic medium, and it's one of my favourite things to watch at the Opera House. And it's a love there that it still continues of movement and music, of course. But I desperately wanted to learn the piano at the same time as my ballet lessons. So, in the end, my parents and my grandfather sought out a very well-respected teacher in Ealing, Eileen Rowe, who's now deceased, of course. But I was 9 years old then, and that was quite a late age to start playing the piano. By these days' standards, most people start when they're sort of a month or something. I mean, just crazy the way they start so early. But my brother and I started with Eileen Rowe in Ealing. Now, I think we have a marvellous picture. Yes, thank you for putting that up for me. This is Eileen, who was our first piano teacher of the Eileen Rowe Piano School. Your first piano teacher leaves a very big impression on you, of course. She was a formidable lady. Many people in Ealing will remember her. She taught an enormous amount of distinguished musicians. She taught our own Hugh Mather's children, I understand, as well. And many other distinguished musicians who have now are in the profession. Too numerous to mention them all by name. On her death, she made a wonderful bequest to the trust, of which I'm now a trustee, for the Eileen Rowe Musical Trust, which helps young pianists from Ealing, or those who have studied in Ealing, who are under the age of 21. Please look us up on the website, because if you're under 21 and you study the piano in Ealing, or you live in Ealing, we would love to hear from you. From Eileen Rowe, I learnt so much. I learnt the art of pedalling, how to produce a really warm sound. I suppose one of her funny foibles was that she often decided that she was going to teach you how to pedal by taking her foot out of her shoe and putting it over your foot to pedal with it. And I can tell you that wasn't the best experience that I liked that at all. So you learnt to pedal jolly quickly. She also had the art of multitasking. She was an incredible lady. Her other passion, apart from music, was Wimbledon tennis. And she would watch Wimbledon tennis on the monitor while listening to you play at the same time. My goodness me, what an amazing lady. And all of us remember her very fondly. And I know that many of you listening this afternoon will also identify with that. Of course, she lived opposite Notting Hill and Ealing High School, which is where I also went to school latterly. And she had many, many students from there. So it was a very, very thriving piano school, and very lively and very entertaining. And all of us who've been through the school, whether we were students of hers or whether we ended up teaching for her, we also have so many stories that we share with each other and spend lots of time entertaining ourselves with those. But she was a formidable lady, but a fantastic teacher. Thank you for the photograph. After that, lessons with a very young Christopher Elton on Sundays, followed by a scholarship then later to the RCM with Kendall Taylor, studying with Kendall Taylor for undergraduate and postgraduate. And then other studies with Vlado Pelmeter and Claude Frank followed that. But the man, and so many others I think this too, that the man that I think of as my musical father is Alexander Kelly. He was a very powerful influence in my life. His humour, his love, inspiration, that word that we hear bandied around so many times, but it's a very important word when it comes to teacher-pupil relationship. And he had an ability to install self-belief. There were many of his numerous qualities as a professor, and something as a young professional that were really appreciated and valued for your life. For me, he was the right teacher at the right time. And that's a very important aspect of finding the right teacher at the right time. Certainly I did then. And for many, many years, I spent wonderful days playing to him. He was extremely generous with his time. No longer with us, sadly, but he's remembered, and his spirit lives on in so many of his students. So, en route towards the head of keyboard work at the Royal College, my life has been pretty polyphonic, I suppose. Perhaps that's why I'm obsessed with fugues. My early professional playing career was started really in the 80s and the 90s, where I made a vast amount of BBC recordings for Radio 3, for Radio 2, for BBC TV, in those days when we actually had BBC live recordings, live performances. I can remember playing live for BBC Concert Hall on a Wednesday lunchtime, very regularly on Radio 3. In the late 80s, that was a regular occurrence. Waiting for the news to finish. The news started at 1 o'clock. You're standing in the dressing room, listening to the news, knowing that you'll be on at 1:05, and then waiting and watching for the red light to say that we're on air. That was in the old concert hall at Langham Place. I'd like to play you an excerpt of one of the Schubert Moments Musicaux that I played at one of these recitals. And at the same time, while listening to that, you'll see a picture of the indefatigable announcer, Peter Barker, sitting with me at the piano for this event. Of course, he didn't actually sit there at the piano. This was a photograph that was taken after the concert. But this photograph was enlarged and put on the walls of the Royal Albert Hall for a display on the works of the BBC in the 80s. I was lucky to acquire this photograph afterwards. It was very, very big, blown up very big indeed. And that's thanks to the prompts producer and my dear friend Nigel Wilkinson, who rescued the photograph for me. But it's a treasure that I really do keep close to my heart, and thought I would share it with you this afternoon. So while we play the track of me playing the third Moment Musicaux in F minor by Schubert, also there is the picture with myself and Peter Barker. as a young pianista performer, I also took part in the inevitable national and international piano competitions. Moscow Tchaikovsky, Gina Bachauer in the States, Santander in Spain. They were all very influential moments in my life. I'll talk more on competitions later, but to note that so many of my colleagues who were in the same competitions as I was at that time from around the world are now in positions either performing regularly as very important global artists, or have positions or have positions in conservatoires in the world. In the days of perestroika, going to Moscow as a young performer in 1990, this was very difficult, as you can well imagine, and it was an experience that left a tremendous impression on me at that time. This is I'll show you I brought it with me to show you this amazing program of the 1990 Tchaikovsky competition, which I took part in. Now, that is huge, and there are about 150 people, I think, who are actually down to play on it. And out of those 150 pianists, 17 were from the UK at that time. 16 men and me. And that was quite something to think of that many people who were actually from the UK in this competition at that time. The you'll be able to see a little bit perhaps on that camera there, but the chair of the jury was Tatiana Nikolaeva. So that was something really quite terrifying, actually, to walk out onto the stage at the Moscow Conservatory with this incredible presence of, I can remember it as if it was yesterday, this incredible presence of all the jury with Tatiana sitting in the middle of that. And it's a very, very tough experience, but my goodness me, what a real life experience that was. Of course, there were shortages at that time in Moscow. You know, it was perestroika, political reform. And I remember a friend of mine said to me, take a bath plug with you. And I thought, what on earth am I going to need a bath plug for? I mean, I'm in a hotel. This is crazy. But take a bath plug, and you might find that there isn't enough to eat when you get there. So take some cuppa soup, and you'll need some cigarettes to bribe the taxi drivers to get around with. And I thought, okay. So I did. I packed them in my suitcase. My goodness me, thank goodness for the bath plug. If I hadn't had one, then I wouldn't have been able to keep clean at all while I was out there. There was only a bath, no plug, and no shower. So there you are. It was a lesson. I don't think we have to worry about that these days, but in 1990, certainly, it was something one had to do. So after that, one of the proudest moments, I suppose, of my life was, as I said, I'm interested in fugues. Those of you who know me well know that fact and know my interest in Bach particularly. But one of my proudest moments was performing the complete 48, the well-tempered clavier of Bach, over 4 consecutive nights at the Lichfield International Festival in 1992. In the midst of this 4-night series, aided by my then husband-to-be, David, who was my driver and picnic provider, I travelled down to London in the middle of this to play in a lunchtime concert, to play Chopin for the comedian Frankie Howerd for his memorial service at St Martin in the Fields. I met Frankie on a cruise ship, extraordinarily. He came to concerts that I was giving on cruise ships at the time. And when he passed away, his partner then asked me to play for his memorial concert. And the surreal thing was, at this memorial concert, I was introduced by Cilla Black. So it was quite an experience to be in the middle of this enormous project of playing the 48, but to travel to London, play some Chopin for Frankie Howerd, turn around, go back up to Lichfield and continue on with those Bach recitals. In addition to numerous other solo recitals, of course, broadcast BBC and also concertos with London orchestras, I was very active as a chamber musician. I worked a lot with some very famous people, lots of famous violinists, cellists. I even, played for Rostropovich's masterclass at Aldeburgh one year. And of course, a lot of my life and my chamber music was with clarinetists. I suppose that was firstly sparked off by learning the clarinet and piano repertoire with Michael Collins, who was in our house, as I mentioned earlier, as a youngster. Mike is also, as you probably know, a very fine pianist and conductor. And as children, we would play the repertoire. I would play the piano, he would play the clarinet sonata, Brahms perhaps. And then we would change over and we would play it the other way around. And I would play the clarinet because I learnt it very badly, but I learnt it. And he would play the piano. And those sessions usually ended up in hysterical laughter because, of course, the music sounded nothing like it did the first time around. But that's the joy of music making. What a wonderful thing. I was so lucky to have that experience, to work and to have fun as a young teenager with Michael. Latterly, I commissioned works in a duo with Nicholas Cox, the clarinetist, and Nicholas and I spent many years playing in contemporary music festivals. We commissioned music from Richard Rodney Bennett, many contemporary British composers at that time, playing Huddersfield and Harrogate festivals. And latterly, I have even performed with Colin Lawson, the RCM's director, also a very, very distinguished clarinetist. So I suppose no presentation of mine would be complete without a performance of a work for clarinet and piano. Because I was digging around in the archives, I found this incredible piece from the 80s that I recorded with Michael at St George's, Brandon Hill. It's the last movement of the Arnold Bax's Sonata for Clarinet and Piano. Please forgive the quality of this historical recording. As I said, it was made on old equipment a very long time ago, but it gives you a flavour of what we were doing in the early 80s. Thank you very much. So, as I mentioned, the polyphonic nature of my work, of course, I've always had a love of teaching. I'm not a believer in those who can play, and those who can't play, teach. I firmly believe that to be able to teach well, you must have been able to play to a professional level at some point in your career, if not always, all the way through. My teaching career ran alongside my playing career right from the outset, and it's always been equally important to me. So teaching at the RCM, of course, has happened in the last 15, 16 years of my life, but en route to the RCM, started off by teaching very young talents, working with Eileen Rowe, I've previously mentioned, teaching at home, then at the Purcell School, at St Paul's Girls' School, and then Royal College of Music Junior Department, where I had some very talented students and young ones there. And then working at the Royal Academy of Music as a piano professor for 14 years. In 2005, I was appointed to the RCM, of course my alma mater, as the head of keyboard there. And in 2010, I was made a fellow of the RCM, and in 2011 was granted a personal chair, which gave me the title of Professor and Chair of International Keyboard Studies. As well as my teaching, throughout my career, up until a few years ago, I was working for the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music, ABRSM, as an examiner. When I was first appointed, I was the youngest examiner at that time to be appointed. And that was in the days when the wonderful Clara Taylor was the chief examiner, and she was a fantastic role model for me. I always looked up to her and thought, you are someone I really hugely admire. Examining for the ABRSM teaches one how to listen, to assess, to listen critically, and it's a really important skill for a musician, especially actually for a teacher or professor, because you need to be able to assess what you're listening to and to be able to put that into words to help your students. I travelled widely with the ABRSM, and to the Far East particularly, and coordinated lots of large teams of examiners, which again set me up for perhaps managing a team as I do now. These various experiences have enriched my life a lot, gave me the toolkit, I don't like that word actually, there you are, I've used it now, but gave me the toolkit to be able to fulfill my current role at the college. So let's move on to guiding young talents and training young musicians. What does it actually mean? How do we do that? Murray McLaughlin talked eloquently on this topic in this very church very recently, mentioning the word inspiration I referred to earlier. It's one of the most important words when describing the teaching process. When we guide young talents, what do? We build their technique. Right. And what is that? It embraces a huge range, a wide range of many, many issues. You know, people think, oh, I want to improve my technique. Usually by that they mean they want to play faster. Actually, there's so much more to piano technique than playing fast, as you know. Finger facility is part of building your technique. Tone control, of course, very important. Stamina. You have to build stamina with your students. Learning to use arm weight properly, even playing quietly is part of building someone's technique. Depth of touch, quality of legato, smooth playing, cantabile, making the instrument sing. That's really one of the most important things in piano playing, is making it speak and sing. How to play staccato. How to develop a wide range and wide palette of colour. So building technique crosses over, of course, into all musical aspects too, but it's not just about playing fast. Encouraging musical awareness in young pianists and showing them with demonstrations is very important too. Most of my teachers actually in the past used to sing along as I was playing, and I certainly sing along with my students now. And most of them can then feel the phrasing as you sing with them, because you breathe. They have to breathe, but you breathe too, and the music can then breathe. Most of all, we mustn't allow our students then to be a carbon copy of you, the teacher. Of course, the very young students will do that at the beginning because they copy, that's what they do. And but trying to get them to understand what you're doing is a very different matter. So drawing their attention to the context of the music, perhaps where it comes from, perhaps other pieces that are written at the same time, other types of music, not just piano music, so that they kind of understand what they're doing a little bit better than they otherwise would if they're just repeating what you're doing or doing as you say. Developing young students their own sound, which is their musical soul, as well as the soul of this instrument. That's one of the very most important things, is to find your own sound. Teaching your students to listen to themselves. Students need to have that help and guidance. Listen to what you're doing. Very easy to shut your ears off. You're so concerned with what you're doing here, perhaps what you're doing here, remembering it, what you're doing here with your emotions, that you actually don't listen to what you're doing. And so trying to ask the student if they can tell which is a better way, either by your demonstration or by asking them to play in several different ways. Not only how it feels differently, but how it sounds if you listen more closely to it. You mustn't rely, I suppose, on being told to play in a certain way, but even from a young age to encourage with your students decision-making and independence and joint decision-making together with your students. I often say to people that I learn as much from my students as I hope they learn from me, but I really do learn from them as we go through. We're constantly learning as a musician. When it comes to training the more advanced students, perhaps the postgraduates, one has to really respect different musical traditions at this stage. Students come from around the world to the college. I have around 60 nationalities in my faculty at the college, and each student needs a bespoke approach, especially at this level of study. Could be that they need help with a certain style of music, or with an aspect of their technique, or help with just simply opening up and finding their own individual voice. The skill here, though, is not to crush the enthusiasm of the student, but to build on what they know and develop and deepen them further. For teaching principles, in general, the bond between the professor and the student is extremely important. The chemistry needs to work. Doesn't mean to say that the lessons will always be fantastically encouraging, or that you'll be told that you're marvellous every week. I can honestly remember going out of some of my lessons feeling absolutely thinking, what have I just done? And then it made me think for a week afterwards. And by the time I went back, I hopefully found the answers for myself. Those students who've had bad days, often those are the best lessons. Those are where the student has to search hard if they don't get what the professor means necessarily. Professor has to have intuition and unlock or awaken the student's mind to a particular emotion or activity or creativity. And we as professors try not to stifle personality. We do need to hone waywardness sometimes. You'll find sometimes with students who perhaps aren't experienced and don't quite know how to make a shape of a phrase. If it's slightly wayward, they're trying to emote, trying to do something, but sometimes they just need a little guidance on perhaps not going quite that far. But the personality is the very thing that we want to hear from a performer. So we have to craft it together with the pianists themselves into something that makes sense, is stylish, it's logical, and yet it shows the students' take on the music that they play. And it is a very fine balance to work together with the students in that way. Of course, students and all of us, as musicians, we can learn from anyone. We can learn from our peers, and the students learn from their peers too. And as a student, you'll take away some things from one professor and other things from another professor. When respect for each other's present, both student for the prof and the prof's respect for the student, that's when the relationship works the best. You will like and agree with some things, and you might not agree with other things. But it's for the performer to decide ultimately what works for them. After all, the performer is the one who's in the driving seat here in the performance. It's not the teacher that's in the driving seat. Although sometimes, you can actually feel it that you want to be, but you can't. The student is the one who's there giving the recital. So, I've talked enough about the training of young musicians at this point, and I think it's time for some music. Here's a performance of Bach's Prelude and Fugue B-flat minor, BWV 867 from Book 1, which I gave at Cheetham Summer School when I was teaching there around 15 years ago. And that was an interesting time because it was just as I'd become head of keyboard at the college, but was still able to do working with all wonderful people at the Cheetham School. My goodness, that's a great school, and Murray does a wonderful job there with such a huge clientele, from amateurs to young professionals. Really, it's wonderful. And part of the job there, if you go to teach there, is to give a recital, which I did at that time. So this is from a live recital at Cheetham's about 15 years ago, and it's Bach Prelude and Fugue in B-flat minor from Book 1. Thank you. So, from my teaching, other learning experiences that one gives, I suppose, as a professor, but also as a student, one has is a masterclass situation. And the art of the masterclass is something that we could debate for hours and hours. A public lesson, perhaps, is more appropriate as a title, and where it's arguably more difficult for a student to respond in public, perhaps. Some people find it much more difficult than others to do that. Is the masterclass then about the student, or is it about the professor? It's not always about the immediate improvement of the student, though often when nerves are overcome, the second time through, in front of an audience at the class, the student is often better in any case, even with the wise words of the mentor who's taking the class. So I think students, performers, they need to treat the opportunities of a masterclass as having access to another professor's ideas, to learn from that presenter's experience, to hear the pearls of wisdom they have to give you, and also as an opportunity to play and to be heard by that person. Of course, there are many drawbacks of a masterclass situation. The professor can be cruel, can be egotistic if we're not careful. And young pianists, though, very smart, they learn to see through this. Can often say more about the professor taking the class than it can about the student, in some instances that I've seen. All in all, I'm in favour of masterclasses, and I feel that they do give a real opportunity, especially when we have, at the Royal College, we have some wonderful masterclasses in the past by Andras Schiff and by Lang Lang, of course, who's been to visit us several times. And this is very, very important for our students to have access to watching these incredible musicians work with our young people. And then another really important learning experience, I think, is the international competition circuit. I've already spoken about the benefits of my own personal experience. I think benefits for current pianists are that one really gets into good shape preparing for competitions, whether they be live or, as many of them are now, online due to the pandemic. Getting match fit, to use a horrible sports analogy, can bring a really wonderful sharpness in the technique and also can concentrate and focus the mind on that repertoire. Gives the young people taking part in these competitions opportunities to hear new repertoire from others, to learn repertoire that they might not have even considered or heard before. So I believe that one should use international competitions as a sort of vehicle for your own personal development, for a chance to perform on a platform internationally when that comes back, and to be recognised not only by the jury, but all of those who are listening online. Now, these days, of course, that we have the live online streaming of a lot of many, many important competitions. In the 90s, 80s and 90s, when I was doing them, we really weren't heard outside of that concert hall. But this is a real benefit because, people can hear you, they get to know your name, and they get to watch out for you for the next time round. We win some, we lose some. Okay, that's life. But the lessons that we take away from simply participating are absolutely huge. Often strong playing personalities are loved by some jurors and absolutely disliked by others. You only have to hear an audience discussing a recital that you've attended, and you'll hear comments in the audience that do not match your own thinking. And you think to yourself, did they hear the same recital as me? That's how it is. We all hear and like and have our own preference, what we like and what we don't like. And of course, jurors are expected to be much more open and to consider many, many aspects of the performer's playing, as well as whether they actually like it or not. But you find that strong personalities, playing that I often like is somebody with a very strong personality. then that can also cause difficulties with some jury members. Please remember, not everyone will like you all of the time. I was given that sentence by Alexander Kelly, who said, not everybody's going to love you all the time. And that was crushing to hear as a young 20-year-old, but then you realise, yes, of course, that's it. As long as you're true to yourself and you show who you are when you play, then you'll make many friends in the audience. The most important thing is to hear who you are. Of course, increasingly more now, competitions are a celebration of young talent. I think of the Hastings Piano Concerto competition, where I'm privileged now to be president. We've postponed again, unfortunately, to February the 22, but I'm very much looking forward to hearing all of you who've put in your applications for that, and looking forward to hearing you play in October when we make the decisions for the concerto competition. In the Hastings competition, not only the first prize winners have opportunities, and they're not just the only ones asked to give recitals. In recent times, they've been giving online presentations to many of the participants, giving a promotion to a whole host of young pianists, and very important to give people a shop window on social media. Remember then, those of you doing competitions at the moment, that the results are given by a committee. Judging is not a perfect science. Treat competitions with positivity and a chance to improve yourself. And, as I said, you might do well 1 minute, another time not so well. The most important is be true to yourself. In terms of the future for careers, for our young pianists particularly now, COVID-19 obviously has pressed a reset button for the profession. All performers have had to rethink the way that they can make their mark, yet continue working at their art to their highest level. People like Hugh Mather here and his team here at Perivale have been a lifeline for our young musicians, giving them this live stream experience. And we are really, all of us, so grateful to you, Hugh, and to your team for this amazing experience and ability to keep our young musicians working. Thank you. Young people have innovative ideas now for playing online. They're working with multimedia, learning to adapt, all skills that young musicians have had to learn very quickly. Some of the older members in the profession have also had to be nimble online too. We've had to be working with a new way of online teaching. And that really, we had to get up and running very fast with that at the beginning of the lockdown, which is a year ago, I think, this weekend. So recordings are now available online, of course, and we can buy single tracks instead of CDs. Let's hope that our musicians are recognised fully for these and paid appropriately. After all, that is their day job. So, to go back to old technology, here's a performance from my CD on the works of Mendelssohn, which was recorded in the late 90s. It's one of the preludes from the 6 Preludes and Fugues by Felix Mendelssohn. It's the one in B minor. Of course, Mendelssohn, we know, was a great supporter, ambassador for the works of Bach. In fact, he found many of the Bach works and reinstated them. And so his homage to Bach in these preludes and fugues are absolutely extraordinary. This prelude, of course, also, if you'll hear, is very fleet, the fingerwork that you need for this, and very sort of reminiscent, I suppose, of his fairy-like writing in many of his piano pieces. As one of his things, he liked to write Midsummer Night's Dream style fairies. So, Prelude in B minor by Mendelssohn. So finally then, to go back to the question, what do I do at the Royal College of Music? Well, I manage a team of around 30 professors and 220 students at the moment, largest faculty in the UK. I have a piano technician team, which I also manage, and I'm supported by a deputy head of keyboard, Ian Jones, and by a wonderful faculty's office, which is led by Alex Beattie. It's a real privilege to work with these distinguished and talented people that I have around me. Of course, the students, my own students, but also all of the students in my faculty who I see as my family of students, really. We have some of the biggest talents in the world studying at the Royal College of Music. I'm not going to name any of them, because if I do, I'm bound to leave somebody out, and that's just not fair. But you all know who you are, and you also know how proud I am of all of you. Inevitably, as artists, they all come with individual needs. Traveling around the world, I have to audition, of course, and give masterclasses on behalf of the college, summer schools, playing chamber music with international friends, and my connection with China and the various partnerships that we have there has become increasingly more important for us in the last few years. Hence my other title, which is Associate Director for Partnerships in China. So the fundamental aspects of the job, it's not just about teaching my own students, of course, which of course I absolutely relish, and I feel very honoured to work with such fine young people. But we have management meetings with the senior team who make strategic decisions for the college. We do things like syllabus setting, organise classes, more recently online presentations to keep everyone going, and that's been really challenging but so exciting and fascinating to do. I examine all the final recitals, do all the auditions. There are some aspects of pastoral care which one has to be involved in as a head of keyboard. Some financial advice sometimes that one has to give. Help with fundraising, reference writing, and leading the faculty's artistic projects. The list just goes on and on. So there are many, many facets to this job. I even remember rescuing a student from Heathrow Airport, which was well beyond the call of duty. Well, he was stranded at 1 a.m. in the morning and phoned me and said the visa wasn't in order. Please, will you come and pick me up? Actually, I had a phone call from the border agency. So I ended up, my husband drove me to Heathrow Airport, and there we were, picking up one of the students. Mind you, it's not something I regularly do, to be fair, but all those aspects of being in charge of a huge group of people, all those things, human things, come into play too. One thing I know is that I'm incredibly, incredibly lucky to work with such a distinguished set of people at the college in one of the most beautiful environments, actually, in the world for music training. I'm also very lucky to have had a life in music and continue to have a life in music, which is my first love, of course, and to have had the support and the love of my musical family all the way through. Thank you very much for listening. As I finish this little talk, I thought I would play the final piece, Granados' epilogue from the Escenis Romanticus. Enrique Granados, another Spanish composer very close to my heart.
Well, what a wonderful afternoon. Absolutely inspiring. I don't know where to start, really. It's such wisdom about piano playing, about the whole business, and such warmth and empathy with so many people. I've heard so much about Vanessa's input to so many young pianists, because it's a tough game with all the joy of music making. We all know that the piano playing world is quite tough, and she is a prop to so many young people, and I know personally of so many people she's helped in so many ways, and it's such a wide portfolio of skills that she needs to do her job. And the Royal College of Music is famous throughout the world for its piano department. Most of them, a lot of the best ones come here, and I see the effects of all that wonderful teaching. It's been a wonderful afternoon, and such fantastic excerpts of piano playing, absolutely ravishing, extraordinarily playing. So, if you've enjoyed it, sorry about the plug, but we always pay our musicians, as Vanessa was saying. We wouldn't dream of having anyone come and perform here, because it's everybody's day job. It's not my day job, because I retired a long time ago, but it's everyone else's day job. So please, if you can contribute, it'd be much appreciated. Go to our PayPal facility and donate something. And so the show goes on. We have piano recitals every Tuesday afternoon. The one on 2 days' time is by a member of the McLachlan family. You've heard about Murray and his wonderful achievements at Cheatham's. It was going to be Matthew, but Matthew's been laid low by COVID. He's quite well, but he can't come. And so it's going to be done by his sister, Rose McLachlan, because there are 3 young McLachlans to choose from. They're all fantastic. So that's on Tuesday. And I've just been updating the list. We have 50 pianists booked for a solo recital here in the next 12 months. They're all superb. A lot come from the college, also from the Academy and Guildhall and everywhere. So we hope to provide a forum for them, and they all get a wonderful recording, and I'm very grateful for your support in watching all these broadcasts. I'd like to pay tribute to our technical team who make all this possible. I just come and start and finish the show, but behind the scenes we have a fantastic technical team led by Simon Shute, with George Auckland at the back there, and Roger Nellis doing the recording. And I'm extraordinarily grateful to have these close friends who've got the technical ability to make this all happen. Anyway, that's enough from me. It's been a wonderful afternoon and a celebration of Ealing music, I think. Okay, so that's it, folks. And thank you for being with us. Good afternoon.